So Eternals is finally out, and you either loved it, hated it, or really hated it. I'm somewhere in the middle, really. I don't really like it, but I don't really think it's like the worst thing ever made. I don't think it's the worst MCU movie ever. Did we forget Thor 2 still exists? I don't know. And this is kind of something I've noticed every time that, there's a movie from a franchise that's really big, and then a movie comes along and disappoints a lot of people in that audience, and they just call it the worst thing ever. And I'm like, are we really calling this the worst thing ever? Are we calling it the worst thing ever because it's like, it's in the now, and it's like, we're just seeing this now, and we hate this right now, and we just last saw this, or do we legitimately hate these? Like, I don't know, I'm taking a few examples, like Wonder Woman 1984, for instance. A lot of people hated that movie, and understandable, but I saw so many bad movies in 2020 that Wonder Woman 1984 didn't even rank up there. And I feel the same way about Eternals. I don't really care for Eternals, and there's plenty of movies that I saw in 2021 that I hated more than Eternals. I saw Dear Evan Hansen, for crying out loud. I'm not gonna get over that. Now, just because I don't think Eternals is the worst movie ever made, that doesn't mean I don't have problems with this movie. I have a lot of problems with this movie. And I just think, overall, this movie's just very uneven. The exposition, the metaphors, it's all way too much for Marvel. It tries so hard to be unlike any other Marvel movie out there, and yet it just feels like every other Marvel movie out there at the same time. It's just so uneven. I initially said, okay, about half the characters are likable. Honestly, less than half of the characters are likable. And even coming back to this now, I haven't seen it again by any means. But looking back and thinking of some of the things I said in my review, some of those things have changed. Some things I'm like, okay, I said this person was really great, and now I think about it, maybe not. And sometimes oh, maybe I don't like this person, and now I kind of do. So it's going to be like that, and I kind of just had more time to process this because that review was from when I first walked out of Eternals. And so now that I've had a couple days to let sit and let people see this movie, I kind of figured, why not just do this review? Spoilers and all, let's just dive right into it. And I'm going to do this review a little bit differently because there's a lot to talk about, obviously. But I'm going to start off with each of the main characters, all 10 Eternals. Try to give some brief thoughts about each character. And kind of talk about some of the scenes in the movie that I liked. What kind of happens next. And most importantly, what went wrong with this movie. Just what went wrong. So, let's start off with some of the characters. Let's start off with Icarus. Now, initially I said I didn't really care for Icarus. I kind of thought he was kind of bland. He didn't really emote too much. And I thought Richard Madden didn't really do a good job. But looking back, I think he may have given one of the better performances. I feel like that, maybe now that we know, what he's done, he killed Ajax at one point. He killed Ajax after he found out about the whole emergence thing. And he was hoping that would lead to him being the new Prime Eternal and all that shit. And it didn't happen. That went to Cersei. And, I thought his coldness was just bad direction by Chloe Zhao. But no, it was more because, he's really cold-hearted. He's definitely not a good guy. And I just thought he did a good job overall. I kind of liked a lot of his action scenes, like the ones where he's fighting in the rainforest, or was it the Amazon, I think? The scene where they meet up with Druid and they kill Gilgamesh and all that. That was really cool to see. You saw him really struggle, and I was like, that's actually really heartbreaking. I don't want to see any more characters die. We'll talk about the characters that die in this movie. And I thought that was really interesting. However, I also felt like he was a knockoff of Homelander from The Boys. There are so many times where I'm like, did they just rip off Homelander, for crying out loud? You would think that after The Boys became successful, they would be like, maybe we should try to take this a little differently. Obviously, he's not as evil as he is, but still, he's still not a good guy. And obviously, he betrayed all the Eternals, he killed Ajax, for crying out loud, and he also has that whole love triangle with Cersei. They've been together for centuries. And now that they've split up, and now that Cersei's with Dane now, played by Kit Harington, there's obviously some friction there, and a lot of the movie, besides a lot of the exposition, it's really dedicated to their relationship, and I just felt like it kind of just dragged this movie out for me. So the second character I'll talk about is Makari, however you pronounce her name, the woman who is deaf in the movie and who has all these speed and such. I thought she was one of my favorites, and she still stands as one of my favorites. I thought she was really good. I thought the team worked really well with her. They treated her like she was just a regular person. She just happened to be deaf, and they communicated well with her. They all learned sign language and such. And I also really liked her chemistry with Druid in the movie. I thought Druid, or however you pronounce his name, I thought that was more interesting than the chemistry between Cersei and Icarus, to be honest. Or Cersei and Dane. Or Icarus and Sprite, which we'll definitely talk about. So, I thought she was really good. Third, Thena, played by Angelina Jolie. At first I didn't like her. I kind of thought they just sidelined her as oh, you have this really big star in your movie, and hopefully she's gonna do a lot. She's kind of sidelined, because, you see in the movie that she's really weighted down by her memories from, being in all this time, and it's really driving her crazy. Her powers just, they just go out there, you'll see. And at first I was I kind of feel like they're kind of holding her back. And, whenever she created her weapons, that was really cool. And other than that, I kind of didn't really care too much for her. Up next, let's talk about Phastos, the first main character in an MCU movie to be in the gay community. And, I thought, the way he, created, weapons and, technology, I thought that was really cool. And to see, his heartbreak is, how this technology is being used. You see he's, in Hiroshima, I think. And, you just definitely see the heartbreak in Brian Tyree Henry. I thought that was really good. And, his family seemed nice and everything, but other than that, just didn't really do too much. Let's talk about number 5, my biggest disappointment, and that was Kingo, played by Camille Nanjiani. Now, I love Camille Nanjiani. I loved him in The Big Sick. I think he's a really funny guy. And I didn't care for Stuber, but I was hoping when he was casted in the MCU, I was okay, he'll give a good performance. And admittedly, he does have some funny moments, but I was disappointed in his powers, and I was disappointed in his character. His powers are just kind of not interesting. He can just shoot beams out of his arms, or out of his hands. It just wasn't as interesting as it sounded. It doesn't look interesting. At least someone like Phastos, he can create technology in a way and create all these things. He's kind of in charge of the whole Unimind thing that you see in the movie. But with Kingo, it just doesn't really work for me. It's just not that appealing. Also, you kind of see that, throughout the years, he's been an actor, and he portrayed his great-great-grandfather, his great-grandfather, his grandfather, his father, and now him. And that was interesting for him to talk about. You see where I'm going with this? They just talk about it. They kind of show oh, here are the posters for that. And it never really is interesting after it's oh, that's a brief mention. And you kind of think to yourself, I kind of want to see that. I kind of want to see that a little bit. That would be interesting to see for a brief moment. It could be a quick montage. This movie also has a lot of flashbacks, so you could have just done it for a second. Just 1 second. And also, even though he's funny, I don't really like his powers. I kind of have mixed feelings about his career. What I really didn't like is that at the third act twist, all of a sudden he's guys, I'm getting out of here. He doesn't want to fight Icarus. He doesn't want to fight Sprite. He doesn't want to fight, Erisham, I believe is how you pronounce his name. I might be mispronouncing that. I don't care. But anyway, he just leaves. He's not even in the final battle. And yet, they're just hanging out with... The Eternals are just hanging out with him again at the end. Nothing's happened. They all did this together. No, all the other ones did together except for you, and obviously Icarus and Sprite and all them, and the ones who were killed, Ajax and Gilgamesh. But why are you still hanging out with them? Because you're an Eternal? It just doesn't really make sense. I kind of felt... It just didn't feel right to me because of that. So I was disappointed with that, honestly. Now let's talk about Cersei. Her powers are interesting. She can transform anything into anything, basically. I kind of like how during that earthquake, where it's oh, I'm protecting a student, so I turn this thing that's about to fall into a student into sand. That was really cool. You saw her, turn that bus into flower petals. That was really cool. But I honestly didn't really get the sense, like, why was she the leader? I just never really felt like she really made the right calls. She never really made any call in that movie, and it just didn't work. Also, her relationship with Icarus and Dane, it just dragged the whole movie. Mainly with Icarus, they spent a lot of time on that relationship, and it's just so annoying after a while. It's like, we get it. We get this whole relationship. It didn't work out. And it's might work out again because there's still chemistry there. And her relationship with Dane, Kit Harington, it's in the movie only at the beginning, only to find out like why they didn't fight in Endgame or anything like that. And it's never that interesting. It's in the foreground and it should be in the background. That's all I'll say. Now let's talk about Druid, played by Barry Keoghan. At first I kind of liked his character, but the more I thought of it, the more I kind of hated him. Now, the only thing I really do like is that his relationship with Makari was really sweet. It's like, it's not really much, but it was just the right amount. Like, that's what the whole Icarus and Cersei thing should have been. Like, it should have been sweet. It should have been, apparently they improvised, Lauren Ridloff and Barry Keoghan improvised their moments together. And, you know what? After seeing the end, I kind of want to see more of those two. But it just didn't make sense, like, in the past, like, during this whole thing when the Eternals are, like, trying to decide what to do with Thena's memories. Basically, I mentioned Thena has her memories all scrambled and such, and now it's kind of causing her to behave wildly. And Ajax is like, we gotta erase her memories. And Druid is like, he's trying to take the moral high ground. It's like, that's just wrong. We shouldn't be doing that. That just sounds wrong. So what has he been doing this whole time? Well, he's been controlling the minds of this entire village, and yeah. So that doesn't really make sense. You're going to take the moral high ground on erasing memories, but you're going to basically control the minds of everyone in this village several centuries later. The more I thought of that, the more that just didn't make sense to me. So he became one of my least favorite characters in this movie. Now moving on to Ajax, the Prime Eternal, played by Salma Hayek. Her performance is fine, but it's not really too much. You only get to see her in the beginning, and you get to see her brief scene with Icarus, which, if you saw the movie, that's a scene where Icarus sacrificed Ajax because, they found out about this whole emergence thing. And her performance is fine. It's not enough for me, I feel like. It was only 2 scenes to really... You kind of get a sense that, she knows what she's talking about, but you don't really get a sense of what she's like as a character. You don't really get to see her care for a lot of these people. You don't really get to see her fight. I mean, you do get some scenes where she does care, specifically for Thena, but other than that, it's not enough. I feel like I would have liked a little more Salma Hayek. Now let's talk about Sprite. Sprite initially started off as one of my favorite characters. I thought her character was really funny. I thought she was like she was kind of like a good comic relief, even though this movie also has comic relief from Camille Nanjiani. But her character does so many terrible things halfway through, and it's just awful. Like, it's implied that she has a crush on Icarus, and I never really bought into that. It just never worked. Like, yes, that's the one thing we need in this movie, with a really awful love triangle. Another really awful love triangle. A love triangle that might actually be worse. Now, obviously, if you've seen the movie, Sprite she's a child, basically. Even though she's the same age as everyone else, even though she's thousands of centuries old, she's still in the body of a child. Did they really think this through? I don't think they did. And so, obviously, she betrays the rest of them. She goes off with Icarus after after they find out what Icarus did to Ajax. He leaves, and then, Sprite follows him because she has a crush on him. It's just not that interesting. And also, I really hated the scene where she finally confronts Cersei, because you see in the movie, she and Cersei are really close. And then when Cersei and Sprite when Sprite is about to attack Cersei, probably going to kill her, what happens? Druid hits her with a rock. Some people some people were upset over what they did to Viola Davis's character in the Suicide Squad. But I would argue this is actually worse. In this movie, that scene was played for a laugh. At least in Suicide Squad, it's kind of played off as like a moment where those people were kind of standing up to her abusive behavior and her immoral stance on a lot of things that were going on in that movie. Here, it's just a joke. A terrible joke. It's not funny. It just comes off as really random. It's like, oh, am I supposed to laugh now? Oh, I'm not laughing because that was not funny. Like, what were you thinking, movie? What were you thinking? And anyway, the ending, they defeat Icarus, they just stop the emergence, and, Icarus flies into the sun and all that shit. And, eventually Cersei's like, I'm gonna make you mortal now. And so now she's mortal, she's gonna grow old, she's gonna die eventually. And, I agree that she doesn't really deserve to be an Eternal anymore. So I guess that's a happy ending. Not for Sprite, but, at least she's not going to be an Eternal anymore. And then let's talk about Gilgamesh for a minute, because he's not really in the movie that much. He's a member of the team. He has taken care of Athena after her memories were wiped. And that's it. There's really nothing else you can say. He's the last on this list because he had the least amount of impact on me. I feel bad for Don Lee. He played Gilgamesh in the movie, but you could have given... For a movie that's over 2.5 hours, there's not enough character development. There's just way too much exposition going on, and I said this in my regular review, but I'm going to say it here again. This should have been a series or something on Disney Plus or something. And honestly, you can explore a lot more. You could explore a lot more with, Kingo's past. You could have explained a lot of things more. You could have had all these really great character moments, and you could still do a lot of things that happened in this movie. It could have been like a 10-episode season. But no, it's a 2.5 hour movie that's trying to do too much, and almost none of it works. But anyway, let's move on to some of the other characters. Let's talk about Dane for a sec. Dane's only in the beginning and the end. You see him talk. He talks to Cersei after the big battle in London, where they meet the Deviants again for the first time in centuries, it seems. And he's really confused about a lot. It's like, who are you guys? Why didn't you fight with the Avengers and all that? And you don't see him again until the very end, where it's like, wow, that's really cool. And I think I have a family secret. And then you see in the post-credits scene, you see that he has this sword, and he hears the voice of Blade, which I didn't even realize that was Mahershala Ali's Blade. I knew he was cast as Blade, but I didn't realize that was him as that character at that moment. I didn't find out until the day after I saw Eternals. It's like, oh, that was Blade. It's like, when I first saw it, I was like, who was that? Okay, whatever. I'll look it up later. Whatever. And now, I'm wondering now, will Kit Harington be in the new Blade movie? Who knows? Anyway, let's talk about the Deviants for a minute, because the design is all right. It's not really amazing, but there's one that killed Ajax, killed Gilgamesh, and kind of got their powers, kind of turned humanish in a way. And he was voiced by Bill Skarsgård, the guy who played Pennywise in It. And after watching It again for Halloween, I forgot how creepy he was as that character, and he was really good in that movie. Here, he's just not given much. He's not really that creepy, and doesn't really get to say much. It's just kind of there. He's just kind of a villain for having a villain's sake. And I also really disliked, you kind of see a bit of it in the trailer. He has Angelina Jolie as Athena. He has her kidnapped. Her eyes are just gone. And he's like, you can't save any of them. And that would be really creepy, and that would be really scary. If Athena didn't kill him 5 seconds later. Yeah, that's what happens in the movie. Athena kills that character 5 seconds later. And it's like, oh, well, you weren't that great of a movie villain anyway. Join the rest of the Marvel villains who weren't that great. Just join the one from Captain Marvel and Ant-Man and the Wasp and Guardians of the Galaxy. There's a lot of lackluster villains in Marvel. We have not changed that. For the things that this movie changes in the MCU, the more they just stay the same. And that's unfortunately. Also, Arishem, that big creature that Ajax could talk to, and then, Cersei could talk to later on. That is menacing enough, but didn't do too much for me. And we see in the post-credits scene, one of the first post-credits scenes, you see Harry Styles as Arrows, Star Fox. Since it was only like a 10-second moment, it just didn't really do too much for me. I kind of need to see him in action a little bit more to get like a sense of it. And that was one of the few things I was spoiled on before the movie came out. And with a movie like this, I try to avoid spoilers as much as possible. So as like I can see it on the big screen for the first time and just be amazed by it without knowing anything going into it. And with the Harry Styles surprise, it was just something I knew. And when I saw it, I was like, oh, I know it's coming. I know that's going to be Harry Styles. Yeah, there he is. Although I was surprised to hear Patton Oswalt as his sidekick, Pip. So that's a surprise, I guess. But, oh well. And let's move on to some of the fight scenes. I'm going to address some of these quickly. Some of the fight scenes I like were the one like in the opening scene, the one in Macedonia. The Babylon one was fine. The Amazon was pretty cool. And the big battle against Icarus and the Unimind thing was fine, I guess. But I was disappointed in a lot of the locations, like the ones that were like back in time, because like I felt like they never really took advantage of their locations. Just felt like, oh, we did this at this point in history, and we're going back to the original story. It's like, oh, okay, so why bother with this? I don't know. So anyway, what happens next? Obviously, we're going to have Arrows in this. He's an Eternal as well. He's going to help Thena, Druid, and Makari. What's going to happen with that? I don't know. Are they going to find more Eternals so they can save, Cersei, Kingo, and Phastos from, Arishem? I don't even know if we're going to get another Eternals movie after this, because Eternals kind of did all right at the box office. I don't want to say all right, but again, we're in a pandemic, so the numbers aren't going to look too amazing. And it also got the worst cinema score out of every MCU movie, so who knows if we'll get another one. Or if we do, if they'll keep Chloe Zhao involved, I don't know. Anyway, Thena, Druid, and Makari are now looking for the other Eternals. Cersei, Phastos, and Kingo. We don't know what's going to happen to Icarus. Obviously, you saw at the end he flew into the sun. Since he seems like to be the fan favorite, who knows if he actually did die? I don't know. And also, just gotta give her a Sprite. She was awful. Just get rid of her. Also, Dane and Ebony Blade. Like, are they gonna move Dane over to Blade? Or is it like, if they do it in another Eternals movie before Blade? I don't know. There's too much that Marvel's gonna try to do. So will they like try to incorporate Blade into this and somehow? I don't know. It just... There's just too much going on, and I don't know what's going to happen next. So anyway, let's move on to this final subject. What went wrong? What went wrong with this movie? Because I think a lot of things went wrong. There's way too much exposition. This movie is 157 minutes long. This is the second longest Marvel movie ever. And a lot of that has to do with a lot of exposition about the way this version of the world works, and like how their characters work, how they have their powers and such, and like all their past and like their relationships and such. And it's just way too much exposition. Way too much. And also there's way too many religious metaphors. Like these like, oh, we gotta do this in 7 days. And I initially, like, that was in the trailer, and I joked to myself, oh, it's gonna take him 6 days. They'll have 1 day to rest. And I'm like, honestly, that's not even the worst religious metaphor. Like, in the opening, you see the opening crawl, it says, in the beginning. And I'm just like, are you serious? Are you serious? It just was annoying after a while. I kind of joked to myself after watching this movie, it's like, the movie Mother, remember that movie with Jennifer Lawrence? Those religious metaphors were subtle compared to this. That movie was subtle. I don't know. And honestly, there's way too many underdeveloped characters. Like, pretty much every character in this movie feels underdeveloped, with some exceptions, like, say, Icarus. Maybe Sprite, even. She's pretty developed, even though her character's just awful. Like, I feel like Kingo, Cersei, Phastos, even Thena, Druid, Makari, a lot of those characters are just... they're just underwhelming to me, to be honest. I just feel like that... they should have done a lot more. They honestly should have turned this into a TV show, and it would have worked. You could have done a lot more. You could have explored more, and, it honestly would have felt more impactful, I would say. instead of like trying to cram so much into a 2.5-hour movie, expand it to a 10-hour movie, and so you can just, you can pause it whenever you want. It would just work. So overall, I feel like Eternals is a movie that it tried too hard in areas where it didn't need to, and didn't try hard enough where it really needed to. And that also just didn't really work. Also, this is the first Marvel movie with a sex scene. I never thought it would say that. It's not that well done, but it was just more surprising. It's like, this movie has a sex scene. I should have mentioned that. Like, and again, the whole love triangles are just so annoying at this point. Like I mentioned with the whole Bright, Icarus, and Cersei love triangle. It took one love triangle and made it worse. Again, this movie tries so much, and yet in the end, it kind of just feels like it's so little by comparison. So, overall, Eternals, there's a lot going on in this movie that I don't know if it like really was ready to address, and I just feel like, again, I feel like this would have been better as a TV show rather than a movie. If they do another Eternals movie, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think they should replace Chloe Zhao as director? What do you think will happen in the next Eternals movie? How do you think this will all connect to the MCU? Because, I don't know. Is this the movie that's going to destroy the MCU? I really don't know. We'll have to see what the box office is like. So, what do you think of Eternals? Spoilers and all. Comment down below. Subscribe to the channel. This is Pat, and stay safe.